The livestock market started off on a good foot in 2020, but Derrell, things changed pretty quickly.
Well, they obviously did. We started this year fairly optimistic in terms of where we were with, beef production was going to be up a little bit, but we expected prices to be a little bit higher in 2020. Trade situation looked pretty favorable. Obviously, that all changed in March when the pandemic really took a hold of the market. And so, we saw a couple of different waves of impacts specifically, or at least largely impacting the beef or the meat industries in general and beef specifically. In March, we shut down half of the market basically from a food standpoint. So we closed down food service. That immediately shoved all of the food demand onto half of the market, if you will. That was a big challenge and lots of stress. We did see some initial shortages simply because we didn't have product where it needed to be, and consumers were, concerned about how things were going to play out. So they actually made the situation worse by trying to overbuy at a time when we were struggling to get the product into the right place in the market. About a month later, as we went into April, then the COVID-19 really hit the labor force in our packing and processing facilities. And so with the reductions there, we actually had to close some plants. A lot of plants were reduced in their capacity for several weeks. And so then we had a real shortage happen for a short period of time. We simply couldn't make the product. And so those impacts continued through that part of the year. As we moved through the summer, the packing plants came back online actually fairly fast. And so we've been back to sort of producing on schedule, if you will, for the second half of the year. And, food service, ended up the year still diminished. In fact, we're having continuing problems late in the year with the pandemic, if you will. And so lots of challenges continuing there. One of the things interesting about 2020 is when it was all said and done, we wound up producing just about the amount of meat that we thought we would. Certainly for beef and even for pork and poultry, we came in within about 1.5% of what our initial projections were back in January.
Well, that's really surprising, especially given, in the summer when we were talking in regards to cattle producers were really in Oklahoma were having to make some really tough decisions.
That's right. We had lots of challenges. The disruption in the packing plants caused all kinds of problems in the fed cattle market. Backlogs. We didn't have to depopulate like the hog industry did, but we did struggle for many weeks into the fall before we got caught up on the fed cattle markets. At the same time all of that was happening, we had drought conditions persistent through the summer in some regions, expanding, kind of coming and going on the margins, but generally getting a little bit worse as we move through the last part of the year. And so that's created lots of challenges, and certainly in some parts of the country, for producers relative to pasture, hay supplies, and really setting us up for what we're going to be looking at in the coming year.
Speaking of that, going forward, and we always ask you around this time of year, what do you expect, and what's some advice that you give to producers going into the next year?
Well, as we start 2021, I think one of the good things we have going for us is the fact that meat demand and beef demand in particular stayed very strong through 2020. And that's a little surprising, but we had a lot of things going on. We did have major recession forced on the economy, if you will, but at the same time we had a lot of government stimulus and other things. We still have certainly a lot of ripple effects from that going into 2021. And so, but at the same time, beef demand at this point continues to look pretty strong as we go into the next year. So, we've got, cattle producers, I think are going to look for certainly more stability as we go into 2021. It's going to take at least the first half of the year as we bring a vaccine in and get the pandemic under control. The second half of the year could look quite a bit different than the first half of the year. And so, we're looking at, and the trade picture will probably improve a little bit as we go forward. We're looking for exports to rebound a little bit as far as beef goes. And at the same time, imports will probably reduce a little bit on a year-over-year basis. So all of those things are generally pretty positive for the beef industry.
When we spoke to you last week, you mentioned that this was a global pandemic, but a lot of things could change with a vaccine in regards to the markets. So what do you like? I know it's really hard to speculate that far into the future, but what do you anticipate?
You know, even more than usual, this is a tough one to try to call in terms of, you know, sort of our price expectations for 2021. At this point, we're still, I'm going to say, cautiously optimistic for modest improvements on an annual basis for cattle prices in 2021. You know, probably in the 5 to 8% range. But that's an average, and actually there could be a lot of movement along the way. And certainly there's risk to the downside if something happens and we don't get the pandemic under control, or it takes longer than we think, then that might weigh on the market pretty heavily. On the other hand, if we're, you know, if that goes pretty smoothly and we get that under control, again, the second half of the year could be quite strong, and we could wind up, you know, improving those price forecasts, certainly in the second half of the year relative to the way we're going to start the year.
Well, Derrell, we always appreciate all the work that you're doing, and, you know, especially in 2020, because it has been such a hard year. So we just want to wish you a happy new year, and hopefully 2021 is going to be a lot better than 2020.
We sure hope so. Better for all of us.
All right, thanks, Derrell. Dr. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.